Across different series, certain characters can go beyond physical destruction and instead target the space between objects, the dimension surrounding them, or even the structure or reality itself. Instead of striking a person directly, these abilities interact with what defines the distance between the attacker and the target. Depending on the verse, cutting space can mean severing spatial distance, breaking dimensional barriers, or outright attacking reality till the conventional durability becomes irrelevant. Because of that, space-cutting abilities are often portrayed as some of the most dangerous in fiction. But that's just a general statement. How about we back it up with a bit of evidence? For today, it would only be fitting if Gojo acted as our test subject. I don't know about you, but I think he's pretty happy to be here. Now Gojo will be taking attacks from multiple space-cutting abilities to see how they interact with his infinity. And if he survives, great, he can go home. If he dies, well, he was gonna die anyway, so that doesn't really matter. Vergil from Devil May Cry achieves space cutting through the Yamato. Yamato is a sword that can literally sever the fabric of reality. It allows him to slice through space and open dimensional rifts, meaning he can separate locations, create portals, or cut through spatial barriers that would normally be absolute. One of the most iconic applications of this is the Judgment Cut, where Vergil creates multiple delayed spatial slashes that erupt around the target, effectively attacking them through space rather than through a direct physical object. This makes him extremely dangerous because he doesn't need to physically bridge a distance in a conventional way. He can simply cut the space that separates him from his opponent. So how would Yamato react to infinity? Well, infinity relies on manipulating the space or distance between Gojo and an incoming attack. Yamato's entire gimmick is severing spatial boundaries and opening dimensional rifts. If Vergil can cut the space that infinity is acting upon, then the mechanism that creates the infinite distance is being targeted directly. And even if someone argues that infinity isn't literally space manipulation, but rather the creation of infinite distance, Yamato's feats still involve bypassing collapsing spatial separation altogether. All this also applies to Yami's Dimension Slash. Yami channels dark magic through his sword and releases an attack capable of cutting dimensions themselves. In the world of Black Clover, many powerful enemies rely on some form of spatial magic, alternate dimensions, or barriers that separate one space from another. Under normal circumstances, these abilities make their users extremely difficult to reach because they exist behind layers of manipulated space. Dimension Slash bypasses that problem entirely by attacking the space itself. Rather than finding a way around a barrier, Yami simply cuts through the dimensional structure that creates the barrier in the first place. This makes the technique especially effective against opponents who rely on teleportation, dimensional manipulation, or spatial defense. We've already seen it slice through abilities that rely on isolated or seemingly limitless spaces, such as Dorothy's Glamour World, where the target is hidden in a separate dream dimension. Yami simply cuts through the structure that created that separation. Applied to Gojo, the argument would be that infinity's endless distance is just another spatial construct. Now for something a lot more familiar. Sukuna's slashing attacks work exactly how you'd expect. He aims at a target, activates his technique, and cuts them. The world-cutting slash is completely different.
Scale of the Dragon. Repulsion. Twin meteors.
Rather than targeting a person, Sukuna expands the target of his technique to include the very space that a person occupies. In simple terms, he is no longer trying to cut his opponent directly. Instead, he is cutting the portion of reality where the opponent exists. This distinction is what makes the attack so terrifying. Normally, powerful characters survive attacks because their bodies are durable enough to withstand the damage. The world-cutting slash bypasses that logic entirely because durability becomes irrelevant when the space containing the target is what's being severed. Since the world-cutting slash slices existence itself and everything within it, it means Gojo and his infinity were both a target for his technique. Instead of cutting Gojo specifically, it's more like the very space or point of existence they stood within was cut, severing Gojo along with it. However, unlike many space-cutting abilities in fiction, Sukuna cannot simply fire the world-cutting slash whenever he wants. Following the binding vow he made after the battle with Gojo, the technique became tied to a set of strict activation conditions. In Jujutsu Kaisen, binding vows are agreements that exchange freedom for power. By accepting limitations on how abilities can be used, a sorcerer can dramatically increase its effectiveness. In the case of world-cutting slash, Sukuna gained access to one of the most devastating attacks in the series, but in return, he had to accept conditions that make the attack more difficult to perform. Law, on the other hand, is weird because he does not technically cut space in the same way as most other characters on this list. Instead, he basically controls it through the power of the Opi Opi no Mi. Law can create a spherical area known as room. Inside this space, reality begins operating according to Law's rules, rather than the normal rules of physics. This is why he can slice people into pieces without injuring them, remove organs without killing the victim, or rearrange objects as though the world were a giant operating table. When Law cuts someone inside room, he is often dividing the space occupied by the target, rather than physically overpowering them. The argument is that infinity will be irrelevant inside room. If Gojo is inside room, the question becomes whether infinity can continue imposing its own spatial rules when Law is already controlling that section of space. That's why room is sort of similar to a domain expansion. They're not identical abilities, but they share a similar logic. Entering the area means becoming subject to the user's technique. Law doesn't necessarily need to send an attack through infinity. Instead, Gojo would already be inside a space that Law controls. So no matter what attack Law sends, theoretically, it should bypass infinity. Butterfly is one of the most dangerous space-cutting abilities on this list. At first glance, the attack may look like a standard sword slash, but the relationship between Soga, his target, and the space separating them becomes warped the moment Butterfly is activated. Unlike normal projectiles, Butterfly does not appear to travel through space. Instead, the attack effectively manifests at the target's location the moment it's released. This gives Butterfly an almost instantaneous quality that makes it extraordinarily difficult to react to. In fact, the attack appears so fast that the word instantaneous is way too short to describe it, meaning the attack literally manifests at a certain percentage the speed of light. What makes Butterfly especially dangerous is its unpredictability. Even the smallest changes in the angle of Soga's attack can result in the slash appearing in a completely different location depending on how far away the target is standing. Combined with the fact that the attack seemingly ignores distance and shows up faster than an instant, Butterfly becomes one of the hardest spatial attacks to anticipate or avoid. It can bypass infinity because it does not meaningfully travel through the space between Soga and its target at all. Infinity's primary defense is forcing attacks to cross an endless amount of distance before reaching Gojo. Butterfly seamlessly sidesteps that requirement by causing the slash to manifest at a target's location almost immediately. If the attack never truly travels through space, then Infinity has nothing to slow down. The only real issue is a cooldown period, as Butterfly cannot be used consecutively. After one use, Soga has to wait for an unknown amount of seconds before using it again. Gilgamesh and his noble phantasm, Ea, represents perhaps the most destructive interpretation of space cutting on this list. In fact, describing Ea as a space cutting weapon is almost misleading because its effects are far more violent than a simple slash. When Gilgamesh activates Ea generates enormous distortions that tear apart the structure or reality itself. Unlike Yami, who creates a clean dimensional cut, Ea effectively shreds the world around it. The attack twists and ruptures the fabric of reality, exposing layers of existence that would normally remain hidden beneath the surface of the world. Imagine the difference between cutting a piece of paper with scissors and feeding it into a shredder. I don't really know what Gojo's supposed to do here. There's really nothing Gojo's Infinity can do. Anyway, who on this list do you think has the best space cutting ability? Is there a character you think has a superior ability? Let me know in the comments.